Earth is home to many creatures. Some may even consider a few of them monsters. But what of those more elusive and hidden creatures? The ones we just can't seem to find. Welcome to Monday Morning Monsters. Cryptozoologist and paranormal researcher Barnaby Jones talks about the unknown, mythical, undiscovered, and unidentified creatures from around the world, and the people who have seen them, look for them, and research them. Hear from witnesses about their encounters, as well as renowned names in the field about their work and research. Barnaby is the founder and lead investigator for Cryptids, Anomalies, and the Paranormal Society based in Wisconsin. CAPS travels across Wisconsin and beyond looking for connections between different phenomena and how they can all be connected. Now, your host of Monday Morning Monsters, Barnaby Jones.
Good morning, monsters. Welcome to the show. We have a great show and a great guest here for you today. But first, as always, let's talk about what we got coming up here. So, first off, On the Trail of Undiscovered Beasts is streaming. The first season is streaming on Paraflix. This is all Bigfoot activity in Wisconsin. So, season 2 will be coming up later this year. It will be cryptids and creatures from all over the United States. Season 1 is just Wisconsin. It is on now. For 10% off your first 3 months, use promo code CAPS10. And if you're interested in supporting our work here at Wisconsin Caps, head on over to our store. You can get all of your favorite merchandise with all of our logos and support us and show your support by wearing it and showing it off. You can get t-shirts, hoodies, sweatshirts, magnets, stickers, mugs, tote bags, tank tops, pillows, and more. Head on over to wisconsincaps.com, click on Shop Our Store, and you can get all of this. While you're online, make sure you check out all of our social media platforms. You can find us at Wisconsin Caps on Patreon, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, and WI Caps on Instagram. You can also find Whispers from the Dark and Monday Morning Monsters on their own Facebook pages. And coming up in just a couple weeks here, we are going to be at the Ohio Bigfoot Conference. That is May 6th. I do believe the event is sold out, but if you guys have tickets ready, we will see you out there. And I believe the vendor area is free to anyone, even if you don't have a ticket, so you can come on out. This is in Salt Fork, Ohio. May 20th, we head to Rhinelander, Wisconsin for the Hodag Heritage Festival. This is the 3rd annual event. There will be guest speakers, vendors, and more. And then June 3rd, we are going to be at Monster Fest in Canton, Ohio. There is a huge lineup of speakers, as well as my guest today will be at this event. And June 9th and 10th, come on up to Marinette, Wisconsin. We have the Marinette Menominee Bigfoot and Paranormal Convention. And then we go down June 17th. We'll be at the Chicago Paranormal Convention. And MI Paracon in August. That is in Upper Michigan in Sault Ste. Marie. And then the Great Lakes Paranormal Conference in September. And of course, CryptidCon in November. And I think that is the end of it for now. We have a couple more events still to be listed on there, but we'll add those as we go. All right, guys, as I said, my guest today is a member of the Small Town Monsters crew and family and has researched and investigated cryptids and creatures and all kinds of stuff all over the United States and beyond. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce Alexander Petakov. How you doing?
Hey, how's it going, man? Thanks for having me on.
Oh, thanks for being here, man. So tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure, yeah. So I'm a documentary filmmaker, outdoorsman, adventurer, sort of cryptozoology researcher. People probably most commonly know me from Small Town Monsters. I do a series on YouTube called Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, which is basically investigations into Sasquatch-like cases across the U.S. and North America at this point. So I've done a lot of other documentaries as well on mystery big cats, so mountain lions in the eastern United States, as well as the Lake Champlain monster, and that sort of thing. So I've done other cryptids. Most of the time it's Bigfoot. That's probably what I mostly look for nowadays anyway, but there have been a few other creatures and strange things thrown in the mix.
Very cool. Very cool. So hopefully we can get to, excuse me, hopefully we can get to all of that today and see what we can dig up with you. So what got you started into all this?
Just always been kind of interested. When I was a kid, I just heard of the story of the Yeti. My dad had told me, and he gave me this figurine that had this kind of ancient looking paper scroll with all this story of the legend of the Yeti on it. And something about it, it was in the mountains at the time. It just kind of, it made me wonder. You looked up into the hills and you said these things could be out there. So it's sort of been a lifelong fascination. I started reading books and watching as many documentaries on those topics as I could, of course. That eventually turned into wanting to look into things myself. I came up during a time when Monster Quest was really popular, and a lot of these other programs back in the day, I think, influenced a lot of people, maybe in my generations, in terms of this kind of material. So blogs were a really big thing before social media was kind of around. There were blogs and forums. That was a big place where a lot of information was conveyed. I used to read Lauren Coleman's writings on the Crypto Mundo blog back in the day. And this was all pre-Facebook, Instagram, all that sort of stuff, where now a lot of that information is conducted via social media. But this was before then. So once I kind of decided to start looking into it myself, I just thought, hey, I have this passion for documentary filmmaking. It's a little bit of my background too. And I love being in the outdoors. So I kind of combined the love for the outdoors as well as looking for cryptids and the filmmaking aspect. And these sort of are this three-pronged approach, I guess, or three interests that come together really well, I feel.
Very cool. So you have gone, I believe you have gone outside of the US as well. Can you tell me about that?
Well, yeah, one of the first ever really cryptid documentaries, I guess, that I did, that I don't recommend people watch because it was from so long ago. It's not good. I wouldn't say it's any good based on my current abilities, but it was actually on the Loch Ness Monster. So after I'd gotten out of school back in 2015, I decided to spend a little bit of time traveling, and I went over to Loch Ness. That was always big on my list. I made it over to Scotland, and of course had to go to Loch Ness and spent a few days there. And it was really interesting. I was always interested in the Loch Ness Monster as a story, despite growing up an ocean away. And after looking into the Loch Ness Monster, I became actually more skeptical of that particular story than previously, which I found was kind of an interesting evolution of the way I looked at it. And it wasn't until I actually started looking into the champ phenomena that I felt there's actually more, I want to say, evidence or more to the champ mystery than I think a lot of people give it credit. And I gravitate more towards champ now, even though I grew up maybe 3 hours from Lake Champlain, yet I was always more interested in Loch Ness across the ocean. But that was my first foray. Was I did a really short documentary on the Loch Ness Monster and just kind of put it out there. And then I started doing Sasquatch related stuff. But the Loch Ness one is really where it kind of started. And that's how I got in touch with Seth Breedlove eventually. He somehow found that film online and wanted to show it at an event for whatever reason. Because like I said, I definitely not what I would like to showcase nowadays, but you got to start somewhere, right? So that film was just it was cool to be able to see a place like Loch Ness that was, I really just kind of visited there. I didn't do any in-depth investigations. The whole thing about Loch Ness is it's actually a big tourism draw, the story of the monsters. That's most people visit Loch Ness for Nessie and for the stories of the Loch Ness Monster. It's one of the biggest tourism draws actually in Scotland. So, I think that kind of colors maybe a little bit of the way the stories are told and maybe contributed a bit to my skepticism. But if you just look at the habitat of the lake, it just doesn't seem as conducive for something large to be residing in it. The fish populations aren't that high. There aren't that many other native kind of animals that live in that area. Whereas you take Lake Champlain, one of the most biodiverse lakes in North America with dozens of species of fish. 90 something, I think. So there's just a big difference there. But yeah, I don't want to be like a downer about the Loch Ness Monster. I just my investigations kind of led me to that point, and my research on it led me to that point. I still think if something was there, maybe it was there in the past. Maybe it used to be able to go in and out of the ocean. I think a lot of people gravitate towards that theory. But now, the way humans have kind of built up that area, it's hard to imagine something would be able to travel very freely between the ocean and the loch, actually.
Very cool. So besides, what you had said about the biodiversity and stuff, why do you think that the Lake Champlain monster is more credible? Like, have you had any experiences there, or what have you done with that?
So, I mean, I did a series, and my first ever kind of endeavor with small town monsters was a series, 5-part series called On the Trail of Champ. That's that poster I actually have right above me here. And that was just to look at that kind of story. And I really didn't know a whole lot about it before. I mean, I knew the basics. Everyone's seen the Sandra Mancy photo. Everyone's seen that, heard a story or two, that kind of thing. But I didn't know how deep it just went. I started talking to researchers. Unfortunately, 2 of the main ones have since passed, being Scott Martis and William Drain Guinness. And they did, really great work on the topic. Scott especially was basically an encyclopedia about anything lake monster, but particularly Champ. He had a sighting there, and he taught me a lot about the history and how much, how many people I met along spending. I think I spent 2 or 3 weekends in one summer up at Lake Champlain, and then in the winter as well. And you just run into people. I mean, you could just ask people randomly on the street, "Hey, have you ever had a Champ sighting?" Most people will either say yes, or "I know somebody who has," especially if you're in a place like Burlington, Vermont, or along the coast. I mean, it was uncanny how many people would tell you the stories, how many sightings there were. I mean, you have things like the Sandra Mancy photo, the Bodette footage, which is this weird kind of footage that shows this thing swimming through the water that's still not public because there's a whole thing with this lawyer who basically is holding it hostage for whatever reason. That's a whole other rabbit hole. But I just think the lake itself, the history is really interesting. I mean, it was part of the ocean up until fairly recently, geologically, at least from what is assumed 10 to 12,000 years ago. So there actually would have been even people living and fishing on Lake Champlain when it was salt water, when it was part of the Atlantic Ocean. It was an arm of this ocean that was created that basically when glaciers receded, then dried up. And you have a lot of fish in the lake that adapted from saltwater fish. You've got landlocked Atlantic salmon, lampreys, a bunch of other types of fish in the lake that are that were basically saltwater fish that adapted to living in fresh water just over the centuries. You had whales. I mean, the state fossil of Vermont is a beluga whale that was found in the 1800s while they were digging a railroad bed a couple miles off the shore of Lake Champlain. They stumbled upon this skeleton. Turns out it was a beluga whale from 10,000+ years ago that was living in the lake. So you had aquatic animals, a saltwater sea life that was living in Lake Champlain. So maybe the possibilities, maybe something managed to adapt as Lake Champlain was cut off and actually became a lake, as some of those fish did, some of those really prehistoric, primordial looking fish. And you've got, 12-foot sturgeon have been pulled out of the lake. You have monstrous fish in that lake. And like I said, it's very biodiverse. It's much larger than Loch Ness. It's 120+ miles long, 12 miles wide, 400+ feet deep. In some of the deepest parts, there are definitely underwater caves in places because we have above water caves that are left over from the Champlain Sea. Basically, a lot of the areas that are now the shoreline of Lake Champlain would have also been underwater, but as the water receded, it kind of lowered a little bit. So you have areas, especially in that kind of valley in Vermont, where it's very fertile farmland now, and that entire part of Quebec going into Canada, where it's all flat, that was all part of this ocean. So that's actually some of the main agricultural areas of Canada, and that part of Quebec just north of Lake Champlain, along the Vermont areas as well. And in the New York side, you have the Adirondacks, and the Vermont side, you have the Green Mountains. So those mountains were basically the shore at one point, and the lake kind of lowered a little bit, but still remains extremely rugged in some parts. And it's just a vast, vast habitat. It goes all the way from Whitehall, New York, which is now known for Bigfoot stories and that sort of thing, into Canada, into Quebec, kind of juts into the province of Quebec a little bit. So just so many stories over the years. And like I said, just having spent time there and seeing how primordial of an environment it is. It has hundreds of thousands of acres of marshland that abut the lake. So you have additional kind of watery habitat where there's been sightings of champ-like creatures. And I don't know, it's a very fascinating place, extremely beautiful, because like I said, you're wedged kind of, the lake is wedged between the high peaks of the Adirondack Mountains on one side and the Green Mountains of Vermont behind. So I mean, it's extremely scenic whichever side you're looking at it from.
So do you think that there's still a connection out to the ocean there? Like either underwater or underground?
I don't know about underwater. I mean, yes, there technically are. There's two connections, but they're extremely far off. So you have one that goes up to the Richelieu River that goes into Canada and then it connects to the St. Lawrence Seaway. And the other way would be going down actually the Hudson River, and it comes out in New York City, the East River and that sort of area, and then comes out into the Long Island Sound. But there's a lot of locks and a lot of controls along the way, so something moving between would basically be impossible. I mean, there's even elevation drops and gains, I think, on the Canadian section of the Richelieu River. I've seen videos of people who've actually boated the entire distance, like a sailboat. They'll go from the St. Lawrence Seaway all the way down the Richelieu River and come out in New York City. And the whole time you're going through the lake, you go through the Hudson River. It's been massive sturgeon, by the way, found in the Hudson River. I mean, up to 14 feet. Recently, a few years ago, they had a sturgeon on sonar they thought was around 14 feet long. Pretty monstrous. But yeah, so if something is existing in the lake, it would have to be probably locked in that lake, which, again, it's a gigantic habitat. You have underwater caves. There's underwater mountains in that lake. I mean, we've seen them going out there on the lake, and it's a very fascinating environment. Some of the sightings are just very intriguing, the way they've been told. And I talked to folks who had sightings that happened in the late 1950s up until a couple of years before I was there. I mean, the sightings they take place every once in a while. And whatever this thing is, I mean, I don't know what it is. A lot of people speculate. Plesiosaur type creature. One of my personal favorite theories is maybe some kind of large turtle-like creature that can kind of change the shape of its neck. And those things can live a long time. And it would explain why you don't see them as often. I mean, they might be living in these environments. And so it's a perplexing sort of mystery, but you look at a lot of the stories and they're pretty consistent from the 1800s on. I mean, before Loch Ness, was even known as sort of a place where there was a monster. That didn't happen until the 1930s, right? You had Lake Champlain already in the 1870s, was known nationally in the news for being the home of the Great Lake Champlain sea serpent, as they called it. P.T. Barnum had put out a bounty, I think of $40,000, something along there. Whatever it was an extremely high price for that time period. Adjusted for inflation, it was an exorbitant fee that he put out for the Lake Champlain sea serpent, dead or alive. There were hunts for the monster in the 1870s. There were sightings. I mean, there's Native American folklore that kind of talks about the great horned serpent in the area, possible petroglyphs from the Native Americans. And you had two tribes on each side of the lake. You had the Abenaki, who were more of an Algonquin people that lived on the Vermont side, and on the other side you had the Mohawk that were part of sort of the Iroquois Confederacy. So two different kind of language groups, and they both had stories, and they weren't necessarily friendly. I mean, they would go to war quite often, but they had legends of some kind of creature. They would pay tributes when crossing the waters of the lake, and it was very kind of interesting just looking at all the people that had lived along the lake, and then into colonial times with some of the stories. So there seems to be something going on. I mean, whatever it is, even if it's not some kind of biological entity, that lake is very mesmerizing and has some very unusual qualities that just to this day, I mean, some parts I could take you to, you would say, this feels like something out of Louisiana. I mean, it looks like a bayou in some of these areas, especially in the summertime when all the greenery is out. And you have these marshes. I mean, it's unbelievable, actually. I believe it blew me away, honestly, with some of the habitats I got to see out there.
Very cool. Well, what are your thoughts on the fact that, if this thing has been seen this long? I mean, we know that, some species of reptiles, turtles and stuff can live, up to 100 years and some fish in that as well. You think that there would have to be a breeding population of these things. And with a breeding population, you would have to have enough of them to have a population to keep reproducing and stuff. So do you have any idea how many of them are possibly in there? Or, I had Katie on a couple weeks ago, and she was talking about her research out there, Kate Elizabeth, and some of the stuff that she had seen out there. I think she said that the most people had seen was either 2 or 3 at one point for a sighting. But what have you guys come across as far as how many are out there possibly, or if they're breeding?
Yeah, I mean, I have no idea how to even kind of approach that question. I've only ever heard of, the multiple humps being seen. Most of the sightings, it's a solitary creature. I mean, if they do see some kind of dinosaur-like neck, I mean, there is sighting of at the Our Family Boathouse in north of Burlington, which is on the mouth of the Winooski River, where multiple sightings of a creature, but then there was one instance where they saw 2 creatures and they were kind of coming out of the water, a smaller one and a larger one. We actually interviewed the woman who had that happen. I interviewed her for, I interviewed her brother for my Champ series, but later on I was doing Chasing Legends with Ash Hoover and Eli Watson, and we did a Champ episode, and we interviewed the woman Christine Hebert, that was her name. Yeah. We interviewed her and she told her story. It was very interesting. And she's been featured in Monster Quest and other programs as well. And what's really interesting is they had this little boathouse where they would rent kayaks and canoes, basically going back decades. I mean, probably from the 60s on. And it's right on the mouth of the Winooski River. And Lake Champlain has 7 or 8 major rivers that feed into it. You've got the Winooski, the kind of the Richelieu that sort of feeds in from the north. The Ausable River on the New York side, which is very close to where the Baudette footage was taken. You have the Otter Creek, which is this big river that empties out into it, where there's been activity down that way. Those areas are actually where the mouths of the rivers feed into the lake, is where a lot of the big fish and a lot of fish like to congregate. There's actually some of the best fishing in those areas. And some of those areas where the rivers empty out goes into the deeper part of the lakes. So you have a lot of sightings around those areas, which is really interesting because that talks about, then maybe makes you think about the feeding habits of certain things. Why is it that a lot of these major kinds of things have happened where there's been these rivers? So where this boathouse was is right at the mouth of the Winooski River, and there's a history of sightings right in that area, including, like I said, Christine and her brother, who lived and worked there for many, many years. And other people as well they told us stories of people who would rent kayaks like weekly on Sundays after church. They would come down, rent a kayak or a canoe, go out with their family, have fun. It was like a weekly kind of thing in the summer months when it's nice out. And there was the one story that we had heard about this couple that with their dog, and they would come every Sunday, rent a kayak or a canoe, and go out in the river, go out for a couple hours. And they came back very quickly, and the dog was foaming at the mouth, and the wife was extremely upset for some reason. And it wasn't until later that they had found out the story was they were actually out in the canoe, and the head of something came out in front of the canoe, and the tail of something was behind the canoe. So it was kind of swimming underneath them in the river. And apparently the dog started freaking out and was frothing in the mouth. And the wife was extremely upset. They didn't know what it was. And they cut their usual trip into 45 minutes and basically left after that. So there's a lot of stories, and they get really interesting, and they go from the northern part to the southern part of the lake. And the northern and central parts of the lakes are really where it's 12 miles wide, where you have multiple island chains in there. It's much larger. Whereas you go down maybe the southern quarter of the lake going to Whitehall, it's no wider than a large river, and maybe only 20 feet deep in some areas. And in the 1870s, a lot of those sightings happened around Whitehall, New York. That's the Whitehall Times used to write about the not the great horned serpent, the Lake Champlain sea serpent, as they referred to it, and there was hunts going on in that area because it was still a very wild and remote area, but especially at the time, they were just putting in the railroad to go from New York to Montreal, and that's when a lot of these, I guess, sightings happened there in the late 1800s. So the lake itself just has a lot of different kind of characteristics and areas and habitat. So it's just so widespread, though. I mean, nowadays there's very rarely any sightings down in that southern section of the lake, where it seems a lot smaller, and a lot of the water there, unfortunately, is it is kind of polluted. They get a lot of the blue-green algae down there, whereas the wider sections of the lake are typically the ones that still stay relatively clean. But now, like I said, down towards Whitehall, there's Bigfoot sightings. I mean, there's even a sighting of people fishing and seeing a Bigfoot-like creature in the water there. So yeah, the Lake Champlain, the whole mystery is very intriguing because there's that human element. What are people seeing? There's some of the alleged evidence that has been pretty interesting. A lot of people try to debunk a lot of it, and unlike the Loch Ness Monster photo, the surgeon photo that came out to be false, the Mansi photo has never really been proven true or false. It's sort of in this limbo. And I actually got to speak to Sandra Mansi. I was one of the last people to ever interviewed her before she passed away a few years ago when I did the series. And I mean, I felt through her story, she was genuine about what she had experienced. Whether or not it was a real creature or not, I don't know. But I don't believe she was in on a hoax or she was hoaxing, created that hoax. That would have been kind of difficult for her to pull off with her family. But yeah, that's one of the ones I think probably the most famous lake monster photo anywhere in the world at this point. So yeah, the whole story, like I said, is just, it's when you go down these rabbit holes, there's a lot there. There really is.
Absolutely. So you have the documentary out. Where can people watch it or find it?
So you can find it on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel. There's also, it's on Amazon. It's kind of like a feature film on Amazon, but if you watch it on YouTube, it's more of a series. It's a 5-part series. So you can check that out. But yeah.
Very cool. We have to take a station identification break here in just a sec. And I want to invite anybody that has any questions about anything with the small town monster stuff or any of the cryptids or creatures, and put them in the comments, and we'll get to them as soon as we get back here. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Looking for a holistic solution? Look no further than LimestreetWellness.com. Lime Street Wellness is a full-service Reiki therapy center offering in-person and distant Reiki sessions. Additionally, Lime Street Wellness is committed to helping clients co-create healthier outcomes with hypnosis, QHHT, and intuitive advice. Lime Street Wellness is committed to helping all that are seeking to co-create better health, peace of mind, and greater freedom. Reiki Master Kevin Mackey uses energy medicine, hypnosis, mindfulness, and intuitive guidance to assist in uncovering, understanding, and removing any blocks or energy cords or mental mindsets that may be intruding and causing needless suffering. Visit Lime Street Wellness today at LimestreetWellness.com. That's LimestreetWellness.com.
All right, guys, we are back. And so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about some of the stuff that you're working on this year. I know Small Town Monsters has a lot of cool projects coming out, and your guys are finally going to do my favorite cryptid. So I have to ask, are you working on the Chupacabra project?
So not particularly. That's sort of, I guess, not really my wheelhouse. I'm more of the Bigfoot guy, and I kind of do my own sort of productions for the Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, and then I'm in some of the On the Trail of Bigfoot type stuff. So the Chupacabra, not really something I will particularly be working on. Sorry to disappoint.
No, I know some of you guys do certain ones on that, so I didn't know if you were involved in that at all. I know Eli was, and I don't know what all everybody was working on. So right on. Well, let's talk about the Bigfoot one then. So tell us about you have your own series on there. And what is that, and where do you guys go and stuff?
Yeah, so I do Bigfoot Beyond the Trail, which sort of helped kind of build up our YouTube audience, I suppose. And I've been doing that now. It's got to be almost 2 years at this point since we started, and it's basically just open-ended kind of approach to the Sasquatch topic around North America. And basically, we go into these areas and really rationally try to explore some of the stories, interview eyewitnesses, locals, researchers, that sort of thing, local museums. So if we go to a place and they happen to have like a local Bigfoot museum, such as the Cryptozoology Museum in Portland, Maine, or the Sasquatch Outpost in Colorado, or Cliff Barrickman's Museum in Oregon. We'll go use those kind of resources, people who are more in a local area. But we really try to promote critical thinking and rational thought when it comes to this topic, because unfortunately, I think with a lot of the TV programs and a lot of the online stuff, there's a ton of just fake stuff out there. There's a lot of people that have very wishful thinking and Bigfoot on the brain, where they go into the woods and everything becomes a Bigfoot, where in reality, I mean, if these things are out there, I don't think you're not going to trip over one going into the woods with how many there are, right? I mean, very little of what I've personally seen of some of the evidence that people portray nowadays could really be 100% attributed to Bigfoot. That's the tough part, right? So just kind of trying to take a very level-headed approach. I think we've done that pretty well, and people seem to enjoy it. And I get a lot of people that message me that are not at all into these topics that said, I never thought about Bigfoot. I thought it was just a big joke. It was in line with Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny. But after watching some of your videos, I am now more open-minded, and I appreciate the approach you guys kind of take. And we've gotten that time and time again, which is awesome, honestly. But just being able to showcase some of the environments we get to go to, so just some of those beautiful locations across North America really is a big part of it. So I try to incorporate a little bit of that, the scenery, and let that kind of be part of the story. And it's also a bit of an adventure series. So you're following us on our kind of adventures with myself, team, researchers, whoever I end up working with. And it's, ends up being a personal journey or just this kind of fun homage to a lot of the old school kind of cryptozoology, which was sort of the trailblazing or the really heading out into the woods and just kind of the adventure of it. That I think a lot of it is lost with the influx of reality TV and just the sort of a lot of the new age sort of stuff that's more prevalent in the Bigfoot world, with some of the more paranormal side of things, where this is kind of, it's all about learning about the environment. And if I can inspire people to just get out and enjoy nature, that's a big part of it as well. So I know that's a long kind of way to sum it up, but yeah, we've got, almost 20 something videos at this point, almost 30, from spanning across the continent, from the swamps of Florida to the remote mountain ranges of Alaska, and pretty much everything in between. So there's a lot to it there. So if you want to check out any of that, there's definitely a lot. I'd be happy to get into anything else about those specifically, if you had questions or anything like that, or if anybody else wants to. There's just so many of them. So it's been an awesome time for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, if anybody out there watching and listening has any questions about a specific region for Bigfoot, feel free to throw it in there, and we'll see if we've got anything from there. So where I know that you've been up by Cliff in like the Oregon area, and I think Mount Shasta, right? You've been up to that area.
Or where else? Towards Bluff Creek. We haven't been to Shasta specifically, but the Bluff Creek region. Okay. So we've been to like the Patterson-Gimlin film site.
Okay. Very cool. So where else have you done any work in Wisconsin here?
No, actually that's funny you asked, because the Midwest is kind of the area that's bare on the map. When I look at all the places we've been, the Midwest is very bare, and I want to change that at some point. I just haven't had the time. There's so many places I'd like to go to, of course, and being that I'm on the East Coast of the U.S., many points in the year where we have just so much snow, it's really hard to get into the mountains, or hard to do a lot. All the animals are hunkered down. So we've done a lot of stuff down south. So lots of stuff in Florida, Louisiana. Some of the more recent stuff I've done, we're going to have something coming out on the Honey Island Swamp Monster. That's going to be the next one coming out. Georgia, Tennessee, the Smoky Mountains area. We've done stuff in West Virginia, Ohio. What am I leaving out? Up and then in the Northeast, we've done lots. So the Whitehall area, New York State, we've done some stuff in New Hampshire, my home state, up in the wilderness of northern Maine, as well as some of the Bridgewater Triangle stories in Massachusetts, and then a lot of stuff out west. So we've done stuff in Colorado, Utah, Oregon, California, Washington, the Olympic Peninsula, and then Alaska as well. So we've just been kind of all over the place, and a lot of it is people that invite me to places where they have activity, or we just pick a really cool spot that we want to go to and do a real deep dive into research, and hey, this is what we want to do. So I know the Midwest, there's a lot of good stories. I hear a lot of people from tell me stories from northern Michigan, northern Wisconsin, northern Minnesota, because you have Ontario, Canada above it, and there's a long history of stuff up there. So it's sort of similar kind of habitat. I will get there eventually. I know, but I'm not discriminating against the Midwest by not going. It's just every time it's tough because in the winter months you usually try to go down south when you can still, when it's not as humid, not as gross in some of those swamp environments. And then when the summers are around, that's when these mountain environments are in their kind of best state to be able to look into. So it's always tricky to pick where to go, but somehow we make it work.
That makes sense. How about Pennsylvania? I'm southeast Pennsylvania, about an hour-ish north of Philly.
So I haven't done anything in Pennsylvania specifically. We've done parts of Eastern Ohio and West Virginia. But I mean, I've been out to Pennsylvania before. I had a crazy UFO sighting out there in central, kind of western central PA. I'm not too familiar with the eastern part of the state. I know that's more of the built up, kind of populated part of the state, but the central and western parts, obviously there's places like the Chestnut Ridge. There's just the Allegheny National Forest, which has a long history of Bigfoot activity. So yeah, those areas are definitely ones I'd like to focus on. There is a whole series that STM did on it's called Sasquatch Unearthed, which was about the Chestnut Ridge specifically on our YouTube channel. There's also been, Seth has done specific films about the Chestnut Ridge area. So that's, if you're interested in that sort of stuff, I know it's not that part of the state north of Philly, but it's out towards the western part of the state, kind of south of Pittsburgh area. And there's a long history of just other really weird stuff out there. The Kecksburg UFO crash. I mean, there's just a long history of weirdness in general. And like I said, PA is where I had my UFO experience back in 2019 at this point. So it's a weird place. There's a ton of Bigfoot stories. I think it has the most hunters out of anywhere in the US. So there's just a lot of people out in the woods. So it kind of makes sense that there would be a decent amount of sightings. PA is actually pretty high on the list for Bigfoot sightings.
All right. And what about Old Green Eyes in North Georgia?
Yeah, I can't say I've looked into that or I'm too familiar with that story, unfortunately. I mean, we've been to North Georgia. I don't know where that battlefield is, but we've been up into the mountains up there in North Georgia, which is kind of part of the starting of the Appalachian Trail and the Appalachian Mountains. And that area is very rugged habitat. There's the Expedition Bigfoot Museum down there. Awesome museum. We've been down there. And it's like, where I live, it's northern Appalachian Mountains, so New England. So it's kind of that tail end, but we have a lot of pine forest, a lot of very diverse habitat. And there's sightings up here. But basically on the East Coast, the place where you're going to have the most sightings seems to be up and down the Appalachian mountain chain. So from up here in the northern parts down to the southern parts, like I said, I've been in the Smokies, in that part of West Virginia, the part that goes through Pennsylvania. There's just a lot of sightings all up in those areas. So, I mean, it just kind of makes sense. It's some of the best habitat on the East Coast, aside from some of those swamps and areas down in Florida and in the Southeast. So, the Appalachians are a great place for that kind of thing.
Don't worry, Lee. We are going to find somebody who knows who Old Green Eyes is. This is the second time that Lee has brought up this question, and none of my guests know anything about Old Green Eyes. And then, what about by Chattanooga? Is that the same area or?
I mean, when I was in Tennessee this summer, I flew to Chattanooga and I had to drive, I think, 2 hours to get to the Smoky Mountains. So, I haven't looked into anything specifically in the Chattanooga area, but the Smokies seem to be close enough.
Very cool. You got a lot of work to do, man.
I guess so.
You've been all over, but apparently you haven't.
Yeah.
So do you do a lot of documentary series and stuff like that? Do you have a actual research area that you spend time when you're at home? Do you go out and do Bigfoot research on your own, or is it more just for the series?
Yeah, so I mean, I was in it yesterday, an area that I used to research very heavily. I haven't been to it as much lately because of the travel and because we're always somewhere else. And I mean, the position I'm in kind of now, I tell people, is I'm basically I have the ability, physically and I have the logistical ability to be able to go out and go to these different parts of the country. I mean, so for example, I'm going to British Columbia soon, going back to Alaska over the summer. These are areas that, I mean, I've always dreamed of being in. So having the ability to go to them, I want to take those chances now. Prior to doing a lot of the Bigfoot Beyond the Trail stuff, I was primarily focused on my home state of New Hampshire, and I've documented about 50 plus sightings here that I've had submitted to me or sent to me, commented, emailed. I have a YouTube channel called Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, and I would do a live stream show on there, basically from when around COVID started. But a lot of the earlier Sasquatch documentaries I did were interviews with researchers. It was less of myself investigating and more me documenting others. And along the way, I just kind of fell in love with that research aspect and started collecting stories myself. I used to do library talks, and every time I do a presentation on Bigfoot kind of stuff, I get people telling me their local stories. And up here, culturally, it's kind of still taboo. It's very hard. It's like pulling teeth to get people to tell you their Bigfoot stories. So that's kind of unfortunate. But there's an area that actually was featured in the first Bigfoot Beyond the Trail called the Granite State Bigfoot case. And that basically was sparked off of the idea where I was going into this research area almost daily during COVID, and when everything kind of first started and everyone started working remote, or the world was kind of shut down, all that entailed that. I was really fortunate to be able to be working from home at the time, and I was going out every single day to this area where I'd had some previous potential activity, hearing wood knocks and stuff. And I was just spending a lot of time out there, learning as much as I could about the land, encountering moose and bear and other animal that are in that area, and having, some other weird activity. And I was linked up with actually a property owner that his house was the closest geographically to this wooded area where there was activity. And he had stuff going on for years. And it was actually the subject of a BFRO case. And I knew some of the BFRO investigators that were looking into this property. And the story was funny, how it all kind of, and this is an area I went to high school very close to it. And I knew this patch of woods. I mean, it's basically a state forest connected with different conservation lands. So for people that might not be familiar, New Hampshire is the second most forested state in the U.S. after the state of Maine by percentage. I mean, it's 85% forested, maybe. Very, very, and it's a very rural state. Not a big state. I mean, Maine's a lot larger, but both Maine and New Hampshire are sparsely populated. You've got maybe 1.5 million population in New Hampshire, and they're all kind of in the southern part of the state towards Boston, as it's not too far off. But you've got the White Mountains up north, which is this hundreds of thousands of acres of some of the most rugged terrain on the whole Appalachian mountain chain. And so these habitats are very wooded. You may have a small town. I mean, I live in the middle of nowhere now, and I have moose and bear and all the critters that are around here on my property, frequently. So it's a very wooded kind of habitat. So you have these Bigfoot stories. You've got stories of the wood devils, old logging tales they used to tell back in the 1800s up north. Logging was a very big industry around here. Still is in some parts of the northern part of New Hampshire and up into Maine. But this area that I was looking into, I'd known since high school. I mean, I used to go out there with my friends and we'd have fun. Never thought Bigfoot. I mean, at that time I was thinking, if there are Bigfoots here, they're way up north or whatever. I was not thinking any kind of stories in this area. Well, lo and behold, it kind of changed. But in August of 2019, I was camping with a buddy of mine in this particular patch of woods, and he had come up from Massachusetts and was like, hey, let's go camping for the weekend. And we didn't have enough time to go all the way up north to the mountains, which are about 2 hours north. So we just said, we'll just go to, I know an area close by. We camped out there. We had this really weird experience. I'm telling you this because I was literally in the spot yesterday with a friend of mine. So I was reliving those moments, but we would hear something moving in front of us in the bush, something you kind of focus in on it at night. And we're camping in this clearing that's surrounded by woods. There's a power line cut not far by. And I think a lot of these sightings have to do with power lines. It's like a very easy access, but we'd hear something move to the left of us and we'd focus in on that for a few minutes. And then you hear something move to the right. You focus in on that. And then something from behind you would start moving. And it was loud, like brush popping and movement. It was just weird. We didn't really think much of it. And I had an audio recorder out that night and unfortunately only had about 45 minutes of battery left. So it recorded that whole time. And, at night we went to sleep in the tent, nothing, we just kind of passed out. Next day went camping to a different place. Didn't even think about it until months later. I was at a local, this was in late 2019. I was at a Bigfoot UFO kind of conference locally. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who is a BFRO researcher and part of a group called Squatchachusetts, which is a Massachusetts-based Bigfoot research group. Great guys. And he told me about this case that they had done a few years ago out in this small rural town in New Hampshire, in this section that I kind of knew. And I said, "Oh, where?" And he told me, and geographically, I'm like, that was right up the street from where I was. And it was really weird. So I went back and reviewed that audio we had from a few months prior. This was maybe in October. So a couple months had passed since I even thought about that audio. I went and looked at it and reviewed it. There were wood knocks. There was like these grunt-like noises. And it was just really all kind of very interesting. And then, the way things happened, 2019 and then 2020 came around, COVID hit. So I kind of had lost sight of that. And then basically, like I've said, when the lockdowns and everything was going on, I would just work from home during the day, and then I'd go out into the woods and spend almost every day in this spot. And I started having these I had to run in with a moose. So then my priority was, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get good pictures of a moose and that sort of thing, because they bed down in the same area and they're always out there. And then I had a couple wood knock experiences when I was out there alone, and then with my brother. And then I kept going back, and I actually was connected to that property owner from that BFRO case I mentioned, talked to him, and he had years of activity, things getting thrown at the house. They had a really weird story, and I just met with him yesterday. Again, he told me a story of they had, all their chickens went missing at one point. And, they've had chickens killed by bears, and you've had fishers. Lots of critters will kill and eat your chickens, but all the chickens went missing. Just some feathers. So they assumed, a bear dragged them all off. The next day, there were 2 chickens that were returned alive, just 2. Very strange. I mean, they had one where he was looking out the screen window of his house and he had a rock thrown at his face. So he had contacted the BFRO, and they did their investigation out there. They had like a tree pushed over or something. But that area I kind of really focused in on. I had cameras out there at one point. I would leave audio recorders and hearing wood knocks, and had a couple other times where I had experiences where I would do wood knocks and get responses back. And it was like this really weird, woody, clunky kind of sound. So it was definitely a strange area. And I was just out there yesterday because I'm going to be focusing in on it here as the springtime in New Hampshire is upon us. That the wildlife starts moving around. And actually about a year ago, almost exactly, 2 friends of mine who are researchers and have had sightings in the state, or experiences as well, they found this trackway along this road in a part of central New Hampshire. So not really close to my particular area, but they had found a trackway where the one friend had seen a Sasquatch a few years ago in that very spot. And I helped them cast the track. And, one of them had these toe impressions because it was basically going up the side of this embankment. And a lot of these dirt roads, I'm sure you're familiar with in Wisconsin, they don't use salt maybe on some of these back dirt roads. They just sand the roads during the winter. And then a lot of that stuff gets piled up by the plows and creates these little banks of sand on the side of the road. And these tracks really only came out because there was like a 1-2 step going right up this embankment and off into the woods. And we found one of the tracks had, some pretty visible toe looking features. So this time of year is around here very interesting because of the animals start moving around, the prey starts moving around. So maybe that is why these things, if there are some in New Hampshire, which there seem to be, they start moving around. So that's why I'm focusing on this. But yeah, like I said, I've got other sightings from New Hampshire, just kind of all over the state, and I've looked into some of the folklore and some really interesting stuff.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think you're right. And another thing is in the spring, a lot of the snow and the ice and stuff melts, which makes a very soft substrate.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, especially up by us, we don't have that year round. You're getting to like June, July time and summer and stuff. It's very warm and it dries that out, and you cannot leave impressions in the ground at all. But you have this very narrow window in the spring where everything's wet, everything's melting, and everything's soft. And it lends itself very well to that, to leaving impressions and being able to get that. So.
Yeah, we call it mud season around here. It's like our 5th season. You get in between, because our winters usually go from having a ton of snow to then suddenly it's 50, 60 degrees and warm out. There's no transition, no graceful transition. Then you have mud season. So, any dirt road or anything becomes, unless you have a serious vehicle, I've seen lots of people in Priuses and stuff like that get stuck in some of these dirt roads. But yeah, like you said, that snow, just the volume of it melting creates this condition where you maybe have a chance to get tracks. Obviously, the winter time around here with snow is the only other time to really get good tracks. But I mean, our substrate is probably pretty similar to that of the Midwest, where it's this deciduous kind of forest floor. In other areas where you have pine trees, it's just the pine needles. So it's not very conducive for tracks, especially in the fall when everything starts drying out. I mean, you'd be hard pressed to find any kind of track. Only thing maybe along rivers, that's where you have some of that sand or mud. But during mud season, that's one time. So yeah, I mean, stuff just starts moving around. You notice more critters moving around. The bears obviously come out of hibernation. I mean, I've got bears on my property that are probably starting to move around now. I have to check my cameras and see what's going on out there. But as that spring thaw comes in, I think in some of these more northern climates, that's when all the other animals start moving around. So if these things are out here, I don't see why they wouldn't as well. So yeah, it's really intriguing. I think places like New Hampshire and Maine, people don't think about them a lot when it comes to the Sasquatch topic, but there's history going back hundreds of years here, even to the colonial days. I mean, one of the first ever recorded Bigfoot sightings that I'm aware of that fits the Bigfoot label, aside from some of the native folklore. I'm not throwing that out. I'm just saying in terms of, Western documented sightings would have been in the late 1700s in Western Massachusetts. There were these hunters that said something was stealing stuff from their property, and they found this large hairy creature sleeping in the woods. And so you have a long history in this area, and New Hampshire is definitely no exception. And that's an area I focused in on. And it's really cool when I'm able to do Bigfoot Beyond the Trail videos on this region too. So we've done a few. Like I said, that first one too was focusing on this area. And yeah, and even yesterday going out to this spot, and it's an area I'll be focusing in on a little bit more here before I head out west for the kind of the warmer months. It's cool to be able to focus back in on the local area because, like I said, it's nice to be able to go to all these other places now, and I get to experience places where a lot of the Bigfoot stories kind of began, places like Bluff Creek or into British Columbia, just the skunk ape stories in Florida and the South. Those are places that, maybe normally I wouldn't really go to. I would focus more on my local area, but that it's always nice to know I have this kind of as sort of my my backdrop, or the place I've looked into a lot before, and kind of really sparked a lot of my fascination with the topic. So yeah, it's nice to be able to cover both, I say.
Absolutely. Well, we are almost out of time for this episode. Lee says that she is going to go out and investigate old green eyes herself and come back and be a guest on the show. So there you go.
Yeah, I just haven't heard that one. I mean, I know there's other eyed creatures that they talk about old yellow top in Canada. There's often these sort of nicknames that get given to particular cases, whether it's a Bigfoot thing or not. There's kind of a friendly sort of name given to it, old green eyes. It sounds pretty benign, but I don't know how how scary the stories are.
I don't know. I haven't even heard about it. I'll write it down. I'll look into this. I'll look it up.
Yeah,
the old green eyes.
Makes me curious now.
All right, it's on my list of things to do. If you got any more questions, feel free to throw them in the comments. Otherwise, before we're done, I wanted to have you talk a little bit about this and anything else that you guys got coming up, because I know this is the first ever Small Town Monsters Monster Fest. So tell us a little bit about it. What can people expect?
Yeah, you said you're going to be there too, so that's awesome. Yeah, basically it's going to be first ever, as you mentioned, Small Town Monsters event, and it's kind of interesting because the way I typically describe it is sort of a fusion event. I mean, a lot of these conferences you go to and it's just lectures all day long, and there's a vendor area, and it's sort of either they're combined or it's separate, but it's more of a traditional kind of conference, where this is more of, yeah, I say it's not a very serious event, but it's serious about the topic. So it's going to be a lot of the guests we have showing up aren't even going to be speaking. They'll just be there hanging out. So it's kind of more of like an informal thing. There will be a few speakers. So I believe, I think Lauren, I know Amy Boo is speaking. I think Lauren Coleman may be speaking, and then a few others. And I know I'm giving a talk as well. They asked me if I would talk, and yeah, I mean, obviously being part of the crew, I'll talk about something, related to STM Productions. But so there's going to be that element where you have some speakers, but that's not like the main focus, right? There's going to be a big area with a lot of the vendors and a lot of the guests where you can just go and hang out. There's also going to be a whole room dedicated to podcasts. So you'll have an area, Jeremiah Bigfoot Society is going to be there. Awesome guy. with an awesome podcast. You're going to have the Astonishing Legends podcast, and they're going to have, I think, Richard Hatem, who is the writer of the Mothman Prophecies. He's going to be hanging out with them, and there's going to be other podcasters as well. There's so many I can't even remember off the top of my head, so I apologize to those that are part of that. It's not intentional. Just there's so many. We have so many different artists from the cryptid community, Bigfoot researchers, cryptid researchers, just people that you might see at other events, people that you don't see ever at events, like Justin Chernopesky from Canada, who's a Bigfoot researcher up there. I've never seen him. I don't think I've ever seen him go to events in the US. So that's kind of a first time event. That's somebody that a lot of YouTube people might be more familiar with. So you're kind of bridging the gap, and it's going to be in a hotel there in Canton, Ohio. And there's going to be like a restaurant with cryptid themed drinks and food kind of specifically made for the event. So it's going to be a really interesting kind of fusion event almost, because, if you want to go hear somebody talk about Bigfoot, come and check out the speaker area. If you want to go listen to a live podcast being conducted right in front of you and you can kind of interact with, go to the podcast room. Maybe you're done with that. 20 minutes later, you can go to the other room and hang out go talk to Cliff Barrickman or any of the other vendors or anything like that. So it's going to be a pretty unique event. I'm super excited. I think it's going to be awesome. We're also going to be showing a lot of the STM films, I think, at the same time as well. So if you're sick of interacting with people, you can just go sit in the room and watch some movies for a bit. There's also going to be a movie premiere for On the Trail of Bigfoot, The Land of the Missing, I believe, the Friday night, because this is a Saturday event, Saturday, June 3rd. And then Friday night will be the movie screening as well. So it's kind of like a double combo. So yeah, if you're interested in that, definitely get on that quick, because I know tickets are selling out. We're almost out of hotel spots. So if you guys are interested in that, definitely check it out. But aside from that, I just want to say the only other event this year that I have planned, at least, is the weekend after that in Fairbanks, Alaska. I will be speaking at the Boreal Bigfoot Expo. So if anybody here is listening from Alaska and you are interested in the Bigfoot event in Alaska, the Boreal Bigfoot Expo, which is literally the weekend after Monster Fest. It's going to be an interesting week between getting from Ohio to Alaska for me. I'm actually going to end up probably driving it. So that'll be an adventure unto itself, which I'm excited for. But yeah, those are the two events. Like I said, Monster Fest, go to check out STM, our website, if you want to learn more about that. But it's going to be super cool. Can't wait to see you out there, man. And I think it'll be an awesome time.
Definitely, man. So remind everybody again, where can they watch your videos, your shows, and get a hold of you or send you any kind of reports or anything for your area?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me specifically is my website, petakovmedia.com. So that's PETAKOV media.com. And the reason I send people there is it's got links to email, Instagram, Facebook. So you can message me on any of the platforms or email me. It's also got links to all the Bigfoot Beyond the Trail stuff. But otherwise, just check out smalltownmonsters.com or the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel. That's where most of the stuff I do is out on. But we also have the other films On the Trail of Bigfoot and that sort of stuff that I participate in as well. And all the other STM stuff, because we have just so much, because we have so many different people working on different projects. So there's always something going on. So you can probably find something you're interested in depending on what you're into. But yeah, those would probably be the easiest ways to kind of get in touch or see what's going on.
Absolutely. Sounds great, man. Anything else you want to tell everybody about before we head out?
No, I think that's about it. I think just don't believe everything you see online, folks, and do your own research. It's really important. Don't trust what people say just because they're on TV or YouTube. Don't trust me just because I'm on YouTube. Do your own research. Do some fact checking. There's a lot of people who want to deceive you in this field. I just don't want people to get suckered in, because I've been there before and it's embarrassing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There's a lot of AI stuff out there now too that is coming out, and it's just making it a mess.
I thought Photoshop was bad. AI is going to make that look like child's play.
I highly recommend on Google, you can right click on stuff and do a Google image search, and it'll take you back to any place that image was ever posted. And you can see the original pictures and anything linking to it. And it's a great resource to try and debunk and find that. I had a friend at work recently show me a picture of a Mothman. Yeah. And I said, nope, I know where that's from. Right. I'm going to bet you. And I Google searched it and I did some research and I found it was actually one of the CGI ones from the Monster Quest episode. I'm like, yep.
Yeah. There's a lot of recycled hoaxes. So definitely important to do your due diligence when it comes to this stuff, and really do your own research. That's that. Like I said, I'm not trying to lecture anyone. I just, we've all been there. We've all been fooled by stuff, and it's just important to kind of do the research for yourself and ultimately come up with your own conclusions.
We need to go back to recording using film.
I'd love to do that. If it was easier, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I mean, but even so, I mean, that stuff, it's not as easy to tamper with, but even so, I mean, there's no matter what medium or source that you have it on, people are still gonna, not believe it and stuff. You could have the world's best footage of Bigfoot standing there,
it's not gonna make a difference
nowadays, whatever, and somebody's still gonna say it's fake. And
oh, absolutely. So there needs to be more evidence, and I think that's a whole separate discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, man. Well, thank you so much for your time. Best of luck to you, and safe journeys on your week-long drive up to Alaska. It sounds like that's going to be pretty interesting.
It will be very interesting. Yeah. Well, thanks, man. And either way, we'll be seeing you in June then. So
absolutely.
Have fun at all your events. Seems like you guys are all over the place. So that's got to be a lot of fun.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Back to back to back all June. The first 3 weekends I start in by you guys, and then I go up to Upper Michigan, and then I don't think it's an event, but I'm somewhere else the next weekend after that. Awesome. So yeah. But, all right, man. Well, take care, and thanks for being on the show today.
Yeah, take it easy.
All right, guys, that wraps up about our show for today. Coming up next week, we have another Bigfoot researcher on. Jessie Lee is going to be joining us to talk about her Bigfoot research. And then after that, another person that is going to be at the Small Town Monsters Monster Fest, Amy Boo, right down here, is going to be joining us here on Monday Morning Monsters. And then wrapping up the end of the month, we have the one and only Ken Gerhard will be joining us. So you got a lot of cool stuff coming up. And thanks, Kurt. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. All right. And so that's all we got coming up here for this coming month. And until next time, guys, we'll see you out there.
The truth is here and now on WLTK-DB Talk Radio at WLTK-DB.com.